Welcome to What Grows. It's a podcast where we play with the connection between who we are and how we grow. I'm your host, Noella Mashi. Rob, your career shows me you're someone who's energized by solving increasingly complex problems. You studied anthropology, then you spent 8 years as a British Army Reserve soldier while simultaneously building a finance career in London. You led off grid solar expansions, worked with educational NGOs in Uganda, and now you're building jackfruit. What strikes me most is that each move you've made seems to be towards greater complexity and greater impact. So I'm curious about what drives you, especially during those moments of doubt that every entrepreneur faces, and how the experiences, the beliefs, and the values that started in childhood have shaped the remarkable path that you've taken. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so here is a question. Um, if that I like to ask everyone. If you could give your life a title, like it was a book, what would it be?
God, I have no idea. There's certainly been some like underlying themes that have run through it. So I tend to try and work backwards from those sorts of things. Um, I mean, my background is growing up in the UK, so it's to parents of one's from America, one's from Zimbabwe, and then moving to Kenya. So there's been a lot of like kind of sharp transitions in my life, I think would be a fair summary. With the underlying theme throughout that I don't tend to settle well into something that's easy. I tend to be looking for challenges. If I was to look backwards at like kind of everything that I tend to do, work outside of work or sort of across the board.
Yeah. Well, sharp transitions is interesting, especially given how varied your career has been and not settling into something easy. I guess let's talk about the early chapters. Was there a moment when while you were growing up when you first realized, yeah, I don't want to just keep it simple. What was that like?
I had an incredibly amazing upbringing. I was never very successful from a pure academic standpoint at school. And I grew up in a household that was basically an open door policy. So people coming in and out constantly from all over the world and very different backgrounds and things. So I think it was just like the natural environment that I was brought up in more than anything. So it felt very normal because I think it's we are the origin. We tend to be as a result of the people who nurture us in the early years. And I definitely think my parents are quite similar to me in that. I mean, both of them moved to London from where they grew up with like no financial means at all, and kind of like hit the restart button as well. So my life growing up in the UK was a kind of formation of that, whilst my parents are trying to be like familiar to their backgrounds as well and create that environment for us, for myself and my brother. So it didn't feel, I don't think I realized for a very long time that this was a sort of natural instinct that I have.
Mm. So how old were you when you moved from Zimbabwe to London?
So I never actually lived in Zim. So I had this like weird, so like I was born in London, and every summer holiday we would spend a couple of months in Zimbabwe with my grandparents, or we would spend a couple of months in the US with my mum's parents. So it was always this like kind of like slightly, it was a very like global spread from a family standpoint, which made it hard to be uh, that connected, but yet we were still very close with everyone um, because of
I
those
mean,
like
that is
large chunks
relate.
of time.
Yeah, I had a similar kind of upbringing in that I'm from Tanzania. We would go home for Christmas, but we lived in Papua New Guinea most of my childhood. And my mom only spoke Swahili to us in at home, and that's how I know how to speak Swahili, and it's really kept me close to my culture in that way. But then there's also, I think, an expanded sense of what it means to be African for me because I lived outside of the continent and came back as an adult and just felt, and my neighborhood was just like people who were from different African countries, and they were all kind of aunties and uncles in that environment, you know?
Yeah.
So tell me about, yeah, growing up in London and the kind of diversity of guests and like people coming through your home. Were there, or was there one adult in your life growing up? Could be a parent or a neighbor or who said something or did something that stuck with you and maybe even shaped how you see the world today.
I mean, there's definitely, yeah, there's a funny thing. My opinion of like kind of the London environment, especially, is that it has a innate ability to thrust people into like a traditional path. Um, and you tend to stay there. But there was one incredibly close family friend who unfortunately passed away about 6 months ago, called Charlie, who, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for work, like the first job, that big moment out of university, um, he just said to me, "Do what you love." Like he like, and I know that sounds like a cliche that you could easily say, but he like drove it home in such a intense way. And he was like, "Whatever you do, do what you love. You'll be great at it if you love it. But you have to love it." And he just like really drove it home. And that has been something that has like stuck with me throughout. And it took me many years to actually implement. Like the first stage of my career, like I was working in insurance, doing credit insurance. Um, so like very very financially heavy. um I didn't love it, and I probably didn't, I wasn't as good at it as I could have been because I didn't love it. And that, so it took me a while to implement that advice. And it was a very wiggly and confusing journey. But the funny thing of what I am doing now, and it was not like this at the beginning, no founder will ever, any founder who says they've loved being a founder throughout is just not telling you the truth. But like in the last like 6 to 9 months, I have loved my job, and it's been crazy. And it's something I constantly come back to. And it's something that I'm also quite sad that I never really got to tell Charlie, which is a bit of a weird one. Just from a timing standpoint, it just never really synced up. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, do what you love. I mean, you studied anthropology. To me, to me, that's like one of those things that you would study if you were like super fascinated and curious and free to like study whatever you wanted. And I just love that. I want to study anthropology one day. Was that you doing what you love?
That was studying exactly what I wanted to study. And actually, my quite old-fashioned great aunt, when I told her I was going to study anthropology, said, "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm sure it will get better from there." um, but yes, I loved studying anthropology. And then I kind of flipped back to going into like a more traditional rails, and then eventually managed to sort of hop out of that one.
I was talking with a friend recently who, we're all just trying to figure out AI as we go along. But he was saying we just need more anthropologists in the room when making decisions about how these things work. What is it about? I mean, what do you think of that? And what did you learn as you were studying people and culture that you still have with you today and that you think is relevant across the board?
I think it's just the complexity of people. I think it would be the like the underlying theme that it was that I like loved about anthropology. I mean, my dissertation was on the ability for sport to create social cohesion. Um,
Mm.
and like I love sport. I spend half of my life, or as much of my life as I can, doing sport and exercising and being outdoors and these things. Um, and now the other half of my life is dealing with people constantly, like colleagues, the schools we work with, investors, funders, donors, external partners. Like I'm just constantly dealing with people. So, and I absolutely love it. And the sport, using that was like kind of probably an early 20s mindset, of something to dig into, but it was fascinating. It was looking at things like the way that the World Cup in South Africa, the Rugby World Cup in South Africa, brought together post-apartheid South Africa, and how like hooliganism in Europe is like a huge divider, but then it can like amalgamate people into this like one big group, when it comes to like an international fixture. It's like these weird, um disconnected features. Um, and that I think applies to everything. Like one of the things I'm constantly iterating on and talking with colleagues and the board members and things like that is like, how do we design ourselves around such a wildly diverse environment? Like the schools that we work in are hugely like every school is an individual, um, and they're all over Kenya, and Kenya's a huge place. And now we're going to Uganda, and like, how do you adjust? And how do you adjust all these process flows and product designs and all these things that I love, but around the people.
Mm.
So it is constantly coming back to the anthropological piece. I don't think I'm applying enough anthropological hard theory because I probably can't remember half of it. Um, but even if I
Yeah.
just think through like what do I read, I'm like reading right now about Tibetan monks and the Qin dynasty and like these sorts of things are all the areas that I end up just naturally gravitating towards. Funnily enough, I hadn't really thought about it in such a framework until you asked me that question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yes, I do. I really feel like without having studied anthropology or even playing team sports growing up, which is honestly a disadvantage, really a disadvantage. But I do feel like sports brings people together, and we are in kind of yeah challenging times, a kind of a bit more divided world. And I wonder, at the scale of countries, at the scale of different states. I'm based in the U.S., but also at the scale of like communities, if you can find a uniting factor, something like sports, um, then it becomes a little bit easier for people to speak the same language and to say, agree that they're aligned on the same thing. And maybe you can just give me kind of briefly for everyone just what you do. Can you tell me what the community, the board, your team is uniting towards?
100%. So just for everyone's background, like we we actually now have three entities within one, and we've rebranded to the Jackfruit Network. But we have Jackfruit Finance that uses technology to lend to schools. They're all low income serving schools all over Kenya, now Uganda, build classrooms, buy school buses, these sorts of things, using technology to digitize. Then we have a foundation that focuses on just impact interventions into those schools. Um, Actually, the way that I originally found your podcast was we're starting to work with Jibu, and as a result, I became connected with Galen on LinkedIn, and Galen's last post was popped up from your interview, your conversation with him. And then we have this thing called the hub in the middle that's kind of like an aggregator and a network components. And what we are trying to do is not just be the lender. We're trying to like link it all together. And I actually got off a call just this morning about some potential program work we're going to be doing around using AI to adapt how we approach each school like an individual. Like every school is different. Every school is run by a different person, has a different origin story and a different reason they operate and work in a different community. And like we can't treat every school as just a broad brush school. 100 children to 1,000 children, $30 a term as a school fee price point to $200 a term, and then like all over Kenya. So we're actually piloting AI right now to do exactly what you asked in your question before, which I didn't really answer, which was like the kind of like that anthropological mindset using AI. We are trying to do exactly that really. It is like treat a school as a school and not use AI to like aggregate data sets to create decisions. Instead, flip it around and the data that we gather on behalf of the schools feeds into a system that then gives recommendations back to the schools on how they can improve their school. And ultimately that will be huge because it will also take into account all the other data points that we've gathered from the school so that the recommendations can be tailored to the school. And no one has done that. And that I think is one of the most exciting pieces of application, certainly for us, from an AI standpoint, which would be very cool.
You give me a specific example of a recommendation that you would make based on the fact that the principal is an individual and the school is unique.
100%. So we gather 300 data points. It's across like finance, impact, quality of the buildings, all these different things. So you can't. So what you hear so much talk now about like ed techs in schools. A school can't use an ed tech if the director can't use a smartphone or doesn't have one, or there's no ICT equipment, or there's no power, or the wall, or like the floor's made of mud and keeps flooding, or they have no textbooks. So like there's a whole like sequence of things that a school needs. and it depends on where in that process, where in that journey the school is. Because there are also these like force majeure type events, like we had in many of our schools in Mathari, where they all flooded and they lost everything. So then the school has to go back to square one again. So we need a system that would be like saying to the school, okay, cool. So you've got adequate textbooks to student ratio, like you've got a good teacher to student ratio number, but you're very, very low on technology in classrooms, or you need to improve the quality of the classrooms themselves. So we're trying to use like, because we take photographs of the classrooms so we can understand the quality of the buildings themselves. Like some of this stuff is aspirational as well. Like it's very technical what we're trying to do there, but it would be amazing. It would like having you turning an AI bot basically into like a tailored recommender for each school. So each school has like almost like an advisor, the same way that I've had advisors building the business and boards and these things. These are like, we're constantly coming back to like the privileges that we all have that most of our most of our customers, most of the schools we work with, our partner schools, will never have. Something as simple as like a financial accountant. Most schools don't have that. They keep all these records themselves. So it's like, how can we create these support functions for the schools we're working in? Because what they're doing is incredible. I don't know how they do it. It's truly astounding.
Yeah. Something else I was having a conversation with my friend Bumi about is um, how to measure impact. Like this sounds really valuable, and I think it's very objectively we need floors that are that aren't necessarily made of mud. We need kind of a stable learning environment, etc. And then there's like the individual requirements of parents and of like the children in the school and even the principals in terms of what is most important to them. An example from from workforce development is, we think that everyone wants to get a higher salary, but what happens, and especially young people, they want to continue to get promoted. But what happens if um, the son in a household is earning more money than the father, and the challenges and the dynamics there? So I'm sharing this example to kind of ask about, yeah, how you consider impact from the lens of like the different stakeholders and their different incentives. Have you found that there are principles or underlying facts that everyone across board wants, or are there different incentives that you need to align when you think about this
Yeah,
work?
everyone's different. It's like I think so far we've seen that every variable that could vary does. Even between schools on the same street in the same community, will have different variables. Um, Ultimately, like, I mean, the impact world and the education space is pretty fractured when it comes to quantifying quality of education. It's like no one can come to an agreement on what that looks like. People have like frameworks like, and I always get this word wrong, pedagogical like frameworks that people know if you follow these set structures and things, they work. But like the moment you throw the variables up in the air, especially when you don't have a reliable like test exam infrastructure, where, and I'm not making any comment here about the Kenyan exam infrastructure, but like people call these into question when it comes to using test scores to quantify educational outcomes. So if you don't have that, it becomes incredibly complicated. So this is kind of why we're just trying to look to walk schools on a journey, and then use the schools as a way to support the communities as well, and to make all these things decisions that the direct school directors or parents or teachers make themselves. So we're trying to also move away from just saying like, here's a free program. Do you want it? Because everyone's always going to say yes. It's much more around like, if you're interested in after school dance classes in your schools, one of our partners, Cheza Cheza, is running programs for schools. Click here to see if you qualify. And even just creating that one additional linkage point, where the director has to click, fill in a form. Like we all know what it's like. Everyone hates filling in forms. So trying to like put the power back in the hands of the school directors, and the same with the parents and these sorts of things, is quite integral, I think, in how we design around all the variables that you're talking about. Because otherwise you just
Yes.
end up using a broad brush approach.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And how did you, why schools? Why Jackfruit Network for you?
Yeah. Okay. So I'd never really been one of those people who'd like fixated on starting a business. So like lots of people I talk to who are entrepreneurs who have started organizations. So like this was the dream. I did it 3 times. It didn't work, and now it's working. That's awesome. Um, I came out of the UK. It's a very long story as to like why the big kind of leaving London, but ultimately there was always this niggle. I always wanted to live somewhere on the continent. And do something different. So it was a very hard plan to put into action because it was so vague. Eventually, I got asked by a like this tiny NGO in rural Uganda in a place called Baduda outside of Mbale, which is on the other side of Mount Elgin. Even Ugandans are like, "How on earth did you end up there?" And I ended up there. I was asked to go and restructure this educational NGO. I it was like sort out finances and operations and just make sure everything's streamlined and then or working. And then find 2 schools to send 80 kids to. And I thought, easy, I'll do that. It'll take me a couple of months and then I'll figure out what's coming next. I ended up spending 11 months there. Um, and the biggest piece that I like fixated on, like operations, finance, structure, all that stuff is fine. Like that's my background. I didn't have any problems with that. And the team were great. Um, I just could not figure out what was a good school. I ended up visiting 300 schools spread all over rural Uganda. I was like traveling around in matatus and bodas and getting stuck in storms. There's a million amusing anecdotes. The best one of me falling off a boda slipped over in a rainstorm and we both slid down the hill and then couldn't get the boda back up the hill. Um, but like I visited these schools and I would just turn up and you couldn't like make meetings. So this like random Mzungu would just like walk into a school in Uganda and they'd be like, "Who are you?" Um, Almost all of those schools were low fee private schools. I'd never even heard of that. I thought all government schools were supporting this space, but almost all of them were low fee private schools. I found 2 fake schools that just had nice websites and were taking grants from US churches. And like I turned up
Wow.
there and I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for this school." And they're like, the local community were like, "Doesn't exist." Like we've had this once before, and you're like, "This is insane." And then when we eventually decided on 2 schools, which took nearly 6 months. Um, the schools were like, "We're desperate to build more classrooms. Like we're at capacity. We can't take the kids that you want to send to us into the school because we're at capacity." And I was like, "Don't worry." Like naivety 101 deployed by the outsider being me. I was like, "Don't worry. We'll create a business plan. We'll do P&L, balance sheet, cash flow projections, and you and I will go to the local banks and we'll get you financing." So I spent like a week with each school, created all these things for them using the kind of like privilege of my background in London and all of my stuff there. And we went to the banks and got laughed out the door. So I was really pissed off because like it was one of the few times in my life up to that point where I've been told like no on something that made total sense. I think people who come from fortunate backgrounds are just used to being able to push things across the line because they can pull different levers or they can network. And it was just like straight no. And then for me, that like converted so clearly into, well, then like these kids, like this is like I mean, I knew most of the kids, like it's kind of, I had no friends in Uganda when I turned up. So like my community really became, eventually when we found those schools, like became part of that. And I was like, this is insane. So that was ultimately what led to education, what led to education finance, and why it was also why we started as Jackfruit Finance first. And now we're calling ourselves the Jackfruit Network because the vision had always been use lending to create the network and then make things flow more easily. Like if the entire education system is connected and people can find schools and they don't have to visit 300 schools to find 2 schools every time they want to do something or support a school or do anything like study a school, like it really can be as broad as anything. Um, we can help and we can improve things. So that's kind of also, you can sort of see how my journey into education is like the reverse of like the building of the Jackfruit network, because we like started with the end point that I learned about in Uganda, and we've just expanded to Uganda as well, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, it really wasn't a journey where I was like, I want to start a business. It was a journey where it was like, I'm just going to go here and like see what happens. And then I really want to help these people. And now I'm pretty passionate about education. And I mean, it does link back because my father is a teacher. So that's kind of also, and he was like, ah, you're in education. Because it was never like, it was never really something that I thought, because I was never envisaged myself as a teacher. But because again, I was like quite boxed in the vision of how I could be involved in education.
So I want to ask you a question that I haven't quite formulated in my own mind, but I've been talking to um, friends who support education kind of at a global scale and in philanthropy about what it's like to be black, what it's like to be a black woman in predominantly white spaces. Oh, and also what's mine to do? Like how much of everyone's stuff am I carrying, including my own stuff and the prejudices that kind of follow me around. And I think you said something really interesting about and I'm paraphrasing, so please correct me, but just having experiences where when something makes sense, the door does open for you. Like if you hear a no, it's because there's a very good reason behind the no. And having that muscle of yes, when I need something to happen, it's possible, driving you and giving you the energy and the mindset that you needed to push through a seemingly impossible task. I think there's something about being an outsider, being someone who's coming from a place of privilege, and having all of that energy and that cushion in the nicest possible sense that's giving you the
Mhm.
energy to drive something that's like quite hard and quite uphill. What do you think
Uh,
about all that?
yes, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there. So this is something I think about a lot and talk to particularly my partner and close friends, like my partner Marine and I talk about this quite a lot. But like the white male privilege, like it's, and I started an organization in Kenya. So like from day one, the being an outsider, especially a white male, was like top of mind in terms of like how we're going to build the business and the demographics of the colleagues and things like that. But it also is such a, it's kind of underlying my confidence, I think, as well. Like as you say, like I have been taught in the first 20 years of my life or longer, well, across my whole life, that if you just push hard enough, eventually the doors will open. Um, and that is just my assumption going into everything, I think. I have sometimes been described as a bit of a battering ram. Um, and you definitely need to be because like the startup journey is absolutely brutal, especially when you're not doing something that people think is like sexy from like like from a investor standpoint. Like the early days were brutal, but then there was also the financial privilege of coming into being a founder. I was able to. I mean, I at the beginning I just could not raise money to start this business. I ended up putting all of my savings into this business at the beginning and lending to 15 schools. Now that was insane, but it was because I was like so passionate that we had to do this. And I was like determined. I was like, this is going to work. We have to do this. And if no one's going to listen, then I'm just going to put my money in. And then I also had the privilege of the fact that like kind of if the whole thing completely blew up, I know that my CV is good enough for me to go and get another job. This is definitely something that gets hard baked into you from an early age, I think, and is definitely top of mind when it comes to also how, from a culture standpoint at work, like culture is one of the things I'm most proud of within the company. Like, and that's the way that we have managed to many times over now bring people into the organization with huge capacity and ability to support the like company's mission and like bring them out of their shell and like get them talking and really fostering like this flat structure. It's something that I say everyone who joins, I'm like, part of your job is to speak your mind and you have to speak your mind. And it doesn't matter who you're talking to. Like sometimes you get told no because we have to make decisions hierarchically sometimes. But 99% of the time, it's an open discussion and we're going to debate and find the right solution here. Really executes on that well, and it's because of all of my colleagues that I work with who are just incredible.
Mm. Yeah. there's a there's a lot to kind of overcome in terms of also the expectation that an organization is a hierarchy. Maybe there's a cultural expectation there, and this is the first time people are told it's your job to say no to me as someone who's like
Yeah,
paying your salary. How did you overcome that?
I truly believe it. I think. Well, I know I truly believe it, and I think that is what overcome it because I just from day one we would sit as a team of four in my garden and debate things. I also felt for many years this like weird association with the title CEO because we're small, and now I really want to honestly drop the founder title. Like to me, and this is something I talk to the board and to senior management about, especially. It's like the company's growing exponentially. Like I have to be up to the task, otherwise I have to be let go and replaced. Like no one is untouchable. And the same is true when it comes to decision making and also like being like immediately willing to, I mean, there's no the one of the big pieces that I look for when we're interviewing people is like pride in decision, not pride, sorry. Uh ego, that's the right word. Like not having ego in decisions and things. Like when people talk you through like their careers and their CVs and things, it's like it's littered with so many missteps. The people that I want to work with and that energize me are the ones who's like, oh God, I was so wrong there. And here's what I learned from this. The people that terrify me to have within an organization are the ones who are just like, no, it was just the wrong time. And, you know, we just had the wrong people around us. And it really does separate. And that's kind of been built because we started from day one looking for people who were like really upfront about when they made mistakes and how they iterated and changed. Um, and I have this and I spend time with everyone who joins the company and just like drum this in. Um, so I hope, and companies get harder and harder to maintain culture the bigger they get. But we've gone from 15 people in January last year to 66, I think we are now. Um, and we really have maintained the bulk of that culture. It just takes a lot more work and effort now, and a lot more people than just me pushing it. So like we formed a culture committee about 6 months ago, which I was so excited about because then I could say like right now we as a collective are in charge of the culture, not just me anymore. Um, so sharing that load has been fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, there's a couple of ways I want to go here. First of all, I want to hear more about wanting to drop the title founder and what you think the Jackfruit Network needs in the next 10 years that you can provide, or that you think someone else would, best be, just tell me, best be suited to provide. Tell me more about that. But I'm also curious, you mentioned you appreciate when people are honest about when they've made mistakes and how they're learning from them. Can you tell me about a mistake that you've made? Maybe it's something that you tell your team about, or it's something that you've reflected on and how you've learned from it.
I'll start with that one first. I mean, the list is of course endless. One of the ones because it just like ties back to what I view as one of my formative experiences that led to what I'm doing now is when I first arrived in Uganda. So there was this like weird familiarity when I got to Uganda, and like I'd spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe, and like you know I know they're completely different countries, but there's like this kind of underlying similarity in terms of the people and how things operate. So I got off the plane, I stepped off the plane with confidence, and the next day I'd said to the team like, cool, so let's meet at 9 a.m. and everyone was like, all right, fine. And I was like, where do we meet? So they said under the tree in town. And I was like, okay. And I was like, how will I find this tree? And they're like, it's just the tree. You'll be fine. So anyway, so I wake up and it is raining as it does in Uganda, incredibly hard. And I was living like a kilometer and a half away from this tree. But I was like 9 a.m. Got to be on time. Walked to the tree, sat under the tree until just after midday, and it was raining nonstop. And at the moment it stopped raining, everyone turned up, and I was just absolutely furious. I was like, "Where have you been?" I like launched into it without taking into account any of the cultural complexities of where I just arrived, or the fact that I was like a guest stroke outsider in the community that I was coming to work in, and I alienated everyone instantly. just alienated the whole team. I had applied like the London mindset and come in. I mean, this was probably the first time I'd been like parachuted into an organization, and I just pissed everyone off. And that is something that I will never forget because every time I deal with a different colleague or I go to a different school or I'm in a different area or country or whatever it is, like you have to change how you operate every single time. And that was like a huge learning for me. And it took me, well, it took me for 2 weeks, people were very, very kind of standoffish with me, but I had ended up playing football with the local football team as well because I was trying to make some friends, and I ended up scoring a goal in a in a critical football match against, like, the next door village, and then everyone was like, "Okay, maybe he's not so bad." But, I mean, up until that point, I was like, really calling my mum every day being like, I'm like, I just completely messed this one up. No one will work with me. And it stemmed from that mistake on day one, sitting under the tree in a rainstorm, getting pissed off. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, that would be the one I would highlight, and the one I often highlight to colleagues as well when we're thinking about new areas and things.
Did you feel like you needed to bring it up later, or did everyone kind of naturally move past it?
I apologized one on one to each person. There was like six of us in that meeting under the tree. Um, I apologized in a different way to each person. I think I'd learned the errors of my way, and um, it was really bad. It was really, really bad, and something that taught me a huge amount. That I intend to never repeat that mistake for the rest of my life. Like that's how intense I feel that mistake.
It it really feels like I mean, there's a lot of drive. Obviously, there's a lot of drive to start company in a different continent. But there's also a lot of I care about other human beings and I care about fairness. I mean, tell me about the values that make someone like you do the work that you do.
um, it's just that I mean the world is unfair as we know, and because of a lucky chance, I was born into a very fortunate position, and mostly most of the time I'm interacting with people day to day. I have come from a more privileged background than them. And I would just love to be I would love all of the energy that I throw into work to be like helping in some small way to equalize that. Um I think I think the reason I went to Uganda was to try and learn how I might be able to use my skill set and my experience and my background to equalize or help 80 kids. And then I honestly got a little frustrated that it'd taken me 11 months, sorry, to help only 80 kids because there was so much going on around me. I mean, there were like huge landslides in Western Uganda when I was there. There was like people washing up in the river from upstream. Like it was quite intense at points. Um, and so you, and then it just became like, as we all know, there's so much that needs doing. To like bring equality or bring more equality to communities all over the world. Um, and I was desperate to try and figure out how I could play some small part in that. Um, Honestly, the idea that there are now 200,000 children in the schools that we work in is wild. It's a number that I constantly forget when I'm like nose up against my laptop trying to like secure the next financing deal so that we've got the capital to lend to more schools, or the day to day drags you away from what kind of drives you. But I think it is that the inequality piece that drives me, and the fact that often it's very small adjustments or small amounts that can drive exponential improvements for different people.
Yeah. And and also I think you deserve to enjoy the work. I can relate so much to what you're saying. And I think what I heard you say is that the past 6 to 9 months, you really started to love what you do. And I think that, first of all, that makes it sustainable, and second of all, why the heck not, right? Like, what brings you joy in the day to day these days?
So, I mean, true, like truly, one of the things that brings me joy is working with the colleagues that I have. I absolutely love it. Like when I step into the office, it's just this like hum. It's this like immediate environment that I love being in. And it's collaborative, and we're debating and discussing and things. And then we're also, because the fundamental components of the business are working, like the lending piece, like we're now able to like coming back to Jibu. So we off a conversation with Galen, he was like, I want to start setting up oh, what's the right terminology? He said water franchise distribution points or water franchises in schools. And I was like, yes, that sounds awesome. And we're doing it. Like it's 2 weeks ago we had the conversation. We passed it off to colleagues, both colleague Galen passed it to a colleague of his, I passed it to a colleague of mine, Diana. And 2 weeks later, 10 schools are about to set up Jibu like water distribution points. So it's going to bring clean drinking water to the kids, clean drinking water to the communities, to the parents, and using someone else's intervention that they've spent many, many years perfecting. And I'm like, that's unbelievable. Like it's so exciting um, to just be able to link incredible interventions like Jibu, for example, or Cheza Cheza, who do dance classes, like connecting the dots and seeing awesome organizations work into the schools we're in. Just it gives me this like like warm glow, and it gets me through those like those like brutal conversations with a US law firm, or where you're like trying to go through another due diligence with an investor and you're like, oh god, I really would just rather be in schools helping set up water franchises. But like I think because all of that hard graft and the unpleasant stuff, which realistically most of my day to day is like really tough stuff. And I'm trying to get better and better at bouncing through 25 different topics. You know, an average day for me is truly like 25 meetings. And it's, you have to flip from pitch an investor, update an investor, deal with a board member, deal with a colleague, speak to head of people, deal with some finance tax complexity that you have no idea what's going on. And you just have to like rely that your CFO and your finance team can answer what they would do. And then you just sense check what they're suggesting. Um, like Friday evening last week, 8 p.m., me and the finance team are on a sudden call because there's this like tweak in one line on a tax bill that's come out that spins a bunch of our tax computations into something different, and we have to file tonight. And I haven't even heard about this until that moment. So like those are the points where you're like, oh God, thank God I've got amazing colleagues, and that's the energy from that. And then the other points are like, I got an update this morning that we're going to put GBU systems in 10 schools, and I'm just like, I have done nothing on this one, and yet because of all the work we're doing as a group, we're able to accelerate this so fast. And those GBU systems could provide water for thousands of families. And you're like, that's crazy in 2 weeks. So that's the piece. That's the last 9 months is when we really started to become the Jackfruit network. Um, and honestly, that is just like another level of exciting, and fuels me constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel happy just listening to that. So that's amazing. And I also just think about it's taking me back to your anthropology, taking me back to how people coming together for a common goal, and even what you told me about your first meeting under the tree, and and how you reunited folks with sports. Kind of connecting the dots backwards is interesting to me. I guess my last question is big picture, because you are making kind of systems level change here. Um, when you look back on your life 50, 60 years from now, like what do you want to be able to say about it?
um, I genuinely feel that I actually made a positive impact on the world. And I know that sounds like very meta, but there's, as you know, there are so many complexities in like actually quantifying what our like net position is as a human. carbon emissions, or all of these different things. Ultimately, like I've thrown all of my energy into hopefully being a small cog in changing the education ecosystem, certainly in East Africa, and ideally creating a blueprint that can create that change at like system level, as you say, with the help of many much larger organizations. If I could see that we've moved the needle on that, that that would be unbelievable. And I think that's what I would be striving towards. I mean, we set a target of in the first 10 years of the business working with 10,000 schools. Um, that felt like a made up target at the beginning just to get investors excited. And now, and I said this to someone recently, I'm actually starting to believe what I've spent 4 years telling everyone in terms of what we can achieve. When you start a business, everyone's like, right, you got to tell them like the huge vision. So you make up some ridiculous vision, and you're like, that's ridiculous. I'm just going to say it so everyone ticks the box. And I hated that part of fundraising in the early days, just like making up shit. And now I I actually believe that we can do what we set out to do. I think the pieces are coming together very slowly, and it's incredible. So yeah, if we just keep moving those pieces together and really help to connect the dots.
Mm, yeah. Well, I so enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much. It was really nice talking to you too.
If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm also always looking for guests who enjoy meaningful conversations. If that sounds like you, please send me a message and let me know what you'd like to talk about. I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening.